Hey, Hoopheads, welcome to the weekly Hoopla, where I break down the need-to-know news in the NBA. This week, we're coming to you very simply. I was going to do a full tiers bracket, but I thought one obvious notable story that you probably could guess at this point should dominate quite a bit of this show. And I also thought, hey, I've been watching too much college basketball for my own good. So, frankly, I would feel completely um, like a fraud if I actually went and broke down a bunch of pro games that I just didn't watch this week. You know what I mean? I enjoy a little bit of bracket stuff. Mine's completely busted. I had Auburn to win it, so great. That's why this is the NBA Hoopla, where I break down the NBA, not any other versions of basketball, because I don't have time to consume all of that. But let's get to the show. Remember, like, subscribe, comment things. If you like the new thumbnail, give it a comment. Put a little extra effort in this week just for you guys. If you think it's crap and it needs more work, get down in the comments. Let me know that too. Of course, we always start with injuries. And unfortunately, this week, we also have quite a bit of those to discuss. I went ahead and shot the wrong one up there first for my rundown's purposes, but we're just going to keep moving on it anyway. My notable other injuries. So these are guys who we need to monitor, but I'm not exactly sure, or that it's the severity levels don't appear to be as bad as maybe initially thought, or in some cases, maybe they are. And we'll kind of break that down here. So OG Anunoby is going to be the first one. Elbow flare up. This is a big deal. It's probably the least severe of all of these injuries listed in this portion. I would say, though, it's very notable because, we're consistently pushing back that window for the Knicks. They're still trying to get playoff seeding in the East. I think they're fifth still at this point, but, you're still trying to fight for playoff position. So you need OG. There's also some rumors about, or a story that came out about how he's very cautious when it comes to playing injured, something I'm completely fine with. I just find it notable because, of course, he's in a contract year and the Knicks are expecting to pay him quite a bit of money in the offseason after acquiring him. So that just seems like an interesting bit of, is that who put that news out there is kind of the moral of where I'm coming from. But otherwise, he'll probably be back playing basketball soon, probably by the end of this week, by the time I'm looking at the tiers for next week, which, unless the NBA goes nuts, should actually happen next week. Then that's where we'll kind of see where OG is, where the Knicks are. Hopefully they'll at least have maybe a Mitchell Robinson, Julius Randle update by then too. We shall see. The second name on that list, very, very notable, Mr. Donovan Mitchell. He's been out for a little bit here with a nasal fracture. There's a bone bruise in his knee. So you could say, hey, it's just the whole season is beating down on him. Cavs have been played well when he was still healthy. He's been out. They've struggled, but they're still doing well. They're keeping their head above water, and thankfully, because of some other teams in the East, they're not really staving off too much competition either, which is also very helpful in this situation. Donovan's probably going to be back. I don't know exactly what this means for his health. I guess is the biggest concern. It's like, yes, take the rest of the season off. Unfortunately, you've already probably pissed away your ability to be in the awards anyway. And maybe you will, maybe we will. We'll get back to the awards with the last guy in this little start to the show. But Donovan Mitchell, essentially should just be resting up for a playoff run. I mean, you don't have the ability to compete for these awards, or you do, who knows? So at the end of the day, with the other teams not necessarily pressuring you, I think it's fair to say that they're probably being as cautious with him as possible because, April 20th is when the first playoffs start. The play-in would be the 16th through the 20th, I think, or somewhere around those dates, close to late April. So we're still about a month out from when you actually need these guys. So I think it's fair to see some of these things linger. And we'll get into one team who's kind of doing this as well later, where, they might be saving for their best shot down the road. Brandon Ingram, this is probably the best news of the week. Unfortunately, there is quite a bit of injuries that we're going to have to get to for people who got shut down this week, essentially. But for this one, we saw pretty nasty looking Brandon Ingram knee injury the other night. He ended up getting helped off the court, but next thing we knew, I think it was the very next day, they were able to say it was just simple bone contusion. Now, the timetable of when he'll return is highly suspect to me. And it is important to note it is a reevaluation period of 2 weeks. So it's like 2 weeks from 2 weeks, essentially, is how I would really read it. More or less, Brandon would be back for the playoff run, potential play-in run, depending on how this goes for them. So that's good news for the long term, because at the end of the day, you don't want to have severe injuries this late into the season, especially with them turning the tide as they have. And now they were able to get a big win without him the next night. We'll talk about that again later in the show. But this was a moment where it could have been very, very, very difficult to look at the positive side of the season for the Pelicans if you see one of your best players go down like that. But luckily it won't. At this point, it will only really affect potential depth, potential chemistry, some of the little things that I think they need to be really on point with by the time the playoffs start. They might be struggling with again because they've missed Brandon on there, and now they're going to have to bring him back into the group. So they're deep enough to keep winning games and to maybe probably stay out of the play-in. But ultimately, it does concern you with how potent the first round of the Pelicans will be, because I think there was a level of potency that we were starting to get to, but now this definitely feels like it at least puts that flame out a little bit. We'll see them. And then final guy here in this list, Jalen Johnson. Jalen has been playing very well. It's a small little ankle sprain. This isn't a big deal. The reason I brought it up mostly was because, like Donovan Mitchell, this drastically impacts, at least theoretically, their ability to win any regular season awards. They both will have gone under the 62 game mark, whatever it is. And now you're sitting here looking at this and you're wondering, okay, so when they first announced this, there was sort of this gray area that the NBA like to put in there. They're known for gray areas. It's their favorite thing. So there's a little bit of a gray area that comes out with this, that, some exceptions might be made in this. So the question now becomes, is Donovan Mitchell and Jalen Johnson not perfect exceptions? Because Donovan Mitchell would have most likely and probably still could end up finishing this season as without a doubt, first team All-NBA guard or second team All-NBA guard, at worst third team All-NBA guard with what he's done. So that has to be respected. And then Jalen Johnson has been kind of clear in a way the most improved player. Now, I'm not going to say it would be the worst sin in the world for Maxey or for Kobe White to get it. But it does feel like Jalen Johnson ran away with that award this year, and it's kind of going to go for naught. Potentially. So I would be very interested to see if that gray area, if those veto cards start coming down. I don't even know when we would expect that. So I guess I should start listening to the national podcasts again for the voters, at least the voting bodies, so that I can start to get a better feel for what the voting bodies are starting to think about some of these nuances. Because at this point, they're going to be, I'm very curious as to how these exceptions are going to be played out. And then the shutdown list, the likely shutdown list. We don't know that all of these guys are shut down. We know 3 of the 4 are. Obviously, this is always a serious situation for Bilal Coulibaly. I'll get better at that one in the years. The wrist fracture is obviously not a great thing. Probably as easy of a injury to shut someone in basketball down with. That being said, cool. Start your off season early. For a guy that young, developing as much as he needs to develop, and then playing on the international teams like he most likely will. But I guess that'd be an interesting question. I guess if you're the French national team, how much does this affect his ability to make the roster? I guess I didn't look into that far, but otherwise, Bilal's got a lot of growing to do. And regardless of whether he was going to be overseas or not for the Olympics in any other season, I think he would still be doing a lot of work, and there would be a lot of conditioning. There'd be a lot of things that just naturally come with a player that young developing into their body, especially with these programs. And if they're buying into him or if he's buying into them the way they're buying into him, I think it works like that 90% of the time. Ausar Thompson, this is a very, very serious one, shut down with blood clot issues. Now, I've got to give it to the Pistons people. They were very positive about everything that came out at this. But it's a very concerning situation. Chris Bosh's career was ended early over this. We have seen other people not have this issue, including Brandon Ingram that was missed, that was noted earlier. So you have to hope that medical science has gotten closer. You have to understand that maybe we as NBA fans haven't necessarily seen the impact as much, but there have been some serious situations in college basketball and at lower levels that have really, 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 really fixed a lot of the risk associated with heart condition in basketball. I mean, I know that it sounds crazy to say, but if you have a bad heart, then you kind of can't play basketball at the highest level necessarily. And if you do, you need to be very aware of the risks, and that your team needs to be aware of the risks. That it's definitely a significant issue. Obviously, LeBron James's son had a similar situation. So there is a level of checking hearts and checking off the boxes, the medical boxes that we need to fix basketball. We don't have the concussion issues that most people are dealing with, like hockey and football have to deal with. But we do have a significant issue with, the way that grinding people into 45 minutes of basketball can do, or at 40 minutes, whatever, in the lower levels. So that's just something that I thought was notable. Obviously, they're all very positive about it, so I'm sure that they'll be able to treat this and deal with it in the future moving forward. And obviously, you're just happy to catch it early. The other side of this, the Isaiah Stewart aspect of the Detroit Pistons shutting down a couple guys into this late into the season. This one also doesn't necessarily, you got strained right hammy here, but I don't know that there was a clear injury. And if I'm wrong, please get in the comments, let me know. But it feels like perhaps this was a little separate punishment for some of the stuff this season. I think that they still have a lot of hope and a lot of respect for what Beef Stew can bring to the table, or even potentially as a trade chip down the road for them. But I think that he's kind of got to get to that point where, okay, the extra crap is getting a little out of hand. You know what I mean? Where people can't describe your basketball game, they can describe your antics. It sometimes works, but you do have to temper it. Like even Draymond Green has obviously had to kind of walk that fine line, even as successful as he's been. So I think there's probably some of that going on there, and they need to have some of their younger guys play. So I do think that ultimately that was just a, why don't you just take the rest of the year off kind of deal. And then Kevin Huerter, the final mention of this, dislocated shoulder and a labral tear. That's pretty gnarly for a guy who catches the ball and shoots it quite a bit. So he's most likely done for the season. It was not officially ruled as an out for the season injury, but it's probably out for the season. Like if he's coming back second, third round of the playoffs kind of stuff. This is an interesting moment for the Kings. They have a very interesting young guy that's taking over the minutes here, Keon Ellis. It's kind of fitting a problem that I've been criticizing them of. I mean, it's giving them a lankier, longer basketball roster to operate with. And while Kevin Huerter's offense is good, they kind of have a lot of offense already. So keying up on that defensive piece, I think, has made a big difference for Sacramento. And they've still, they just took a nasty loss the other night that was just one of those head scratchers from them. But then, I think they've already bounced back since. So, you're looking at a team that is still very talented. I still think they're pretty critically flawed. But this Keon Ellis moment does kind of make it a little more interesting to see if now the roster slides into a more competitive version of what it currently is than if they would have just ran through with this thing as it is. And then maybe Kevin Huerter does come back and helps them get hot and they can make a Western Conference Finals run. But again, I just think this team is terminally, doomed at some point in stage of this competition, whether it's early or late. It just feels like you don't have the right pieces. Like it's a good basketball roster. It's winning games the way that nothing surprises me about when they're winning games. Nothing surprises me when they're losing games, because it's just not a basketball roster that's built to dominate. In my opinion, it's built to be very successful, but it's not built to dominate. And that's something they'll have to deal with in the off season. Of course, like I said, Keon Ellis, it's a hell of a role of a lifetime for somebody in his position. So it's fun to also kind of look at it from that angle. We'll jump into the gambling portion of this show because I put it all over the place. You got to see all of the stuff this week. Everybody's talking about it. So obviously we got to as well. I'm probably not going to come at this with too many different angles than what you've heard, but I won't waste your time on any other stuff. I'm going to give you kind of the meat and potatoes. I'll give you my thoughts on this, and I'll let you, the viewer, kind of interpret the future for yourself. So this has been a pretty hot button issue all season. I think 2 weeks ago on the main podcast, we talked about Rudy Gobert's money sign gesture, how thick the fine was, how interesting that was, being a conversation. I think Patrick Moore took the side of, is the NBA trying to put their player in the place, and I took the side of, well, for Rudy, it was they had probable cause to do that, to do what they did. They had every reason to. So I think that was just sort of part of the reason why I didn't quite hate it. Didn't think of much of it either at the time. But now I think you do have to kind of look back at it and say, man, this has sort of started a dialogue now, right? Because what Rudy did was he got the media having the desire to write these stories, have the desire to explore it more, have the desire to ask other people questions. And that was obviously producing some interesting stuff. I've taken a couple clips and we'll talk about those. But then the next shoe kind of drops. And now we realize that DraftKings and FanDuel are going to be doing live bets from the League Pass app, which, it pairs with what Adam had talked about a couple years ago. He said the words, we need to take gambling from the underground and into the spotlight, right? Or into the sunlight. So I think it's pretty fair to say that the league has been ready to make these moves for quite some time. And I think or the way they're going to sell the story is that they're doing what's right. It's prohibition. We're going to make sure we're monitoring those alcoholics, right? We're going to make sure we're monitoring DWIs, right? Like we're going to make sure that our culture doesn't get too obsessed with alcohol, right? You know what I mean? We've been down this path before, but and I'm really not that anti-gambling. I'll get to that as we go, but there is some of this where you have to laugh from a league perspective, where it's like, I understand this is bringing in incredible gobs of money. It makes perfect sense. I do understand. At the same time, this is where the more Adam kind of tiptoes this line, the more he's going to look like a politician. I mean, he'll be earning that paycheck, but naturally the reputation hit of being the face that has to answer all these questions is a part of it. And there's a recklessness to gambling that we know we're going to hit. And like I said, I'll get to that, but let me get to these statements that have been made, because I think that's really the reason why I'm even considered doing so much time on the show and kind of pushing back the tears back for this, is because this really it really needs to be thought about and talked about, not just by people like me, but like by a lot of folks, a lot of people, people in Washington, people in fucking Secaucus, New Jersey, which is where this is at, right? It's a conversation. I mean, people in every media outlet is going to have some real hard conversations about this. And I'm sure it's probably still 5 to 10 years before we see the ramifications of this fully, but that day is coming. Coaches and players, a lot of interesting conversations here. Halliburton kind of had the most, the least concerning statement of these three that I've chosen here. To half the world, I'm just helping them make money on DraftKings or whatever. I'm the prop. In which that's right. I mean, that is a fair way to look at it. I mean, we do want to celebrate athletes. We want this all to mean something, because, yes, there's money involved, but like, if we all stop caring about this, that starts to dry up from every side, right? Every angle. So on one hand, gambling is amazing for keeping the attention span and grabbing new audiences. On the other, it's going to feel very soulless, and it's going to feel very gross, especially at the beginning, right? So I think for Halliburton to kind of speak that not feeling human aspect of this kind of makes a lot of sense right now. But then we jump into far more concerning levels when we get to JB Bickerstaff's comments. Now, the first comment, very simple. He's talking about this point spread and how he'll have people to yell at him to leave guys out so that they can cover the point spread. But obviously, because it's 82 games, I just went into 15 minutes worth of injuries. There's no reason to be giving in to these insane people who think that their one night prop bet, whatever, is more important than the longevity of a career of the franchise piece that you have. Like all the different factors that go into making decisions to play guys. You know, you could leave somebody out for the wrong second every game. You know what I mean? That pressure is felt by those coaches and in those front offices. So obviously, like, it's pretty ridiculous to hear that. That's literally what JB said. But it got far more concerning whenever he mentioned that he gets regular text about these issues, as well as doxing his family in his own house. So for a lot of reasons there, that alone should just take this to a way bigger factor, especially in Secaucus, New Jersey. Because, like, look, the advent of social media has introduced all kinds of hate speech into the world, right? And the ability to do so like that. So, look, you can't fix it all. You can't, there's some level of this that unfortunately all of these people are dealing with, because any weirdo around the world can just get on the internet and start doing weird shit like this. And when you're one of the most famous people, or when you're tied to something as popular as a professional sport, this is just sort of the world you have to live in. And I accept that. But at the same time, doxing families, and specifically if these text messages are relating to bets, right? If we're going that far on this isn't just insane people. This isn't just rival fans. You know what I mean? This isn't just trolls. This is seriously just about one issue. I think that raises it even more levels, because it's already giving us a clear history. I mean, we know the history of gambling, but it's kind of like the history of gambling so far has been illegal. So all that stuff doesn't necessarily count in the legal world, right? Because now we can fix all of that. We can have we can take it from the underground into the sunlight, right, Adam? Like, that's the way we're going to talk about it. But in that reality, we've all grown up with this stuff. The gambling isn't new. We didn't just invent it. We just legalized it. So it's an interesting thing to look at from that perspective, because I get it. When you're famous, you have to understand that doxing and terrible things like that are a part of the game. You're going to have to figure out better security for your house. You're going to have to figure out better security on your phone lines. You're going to have to practice more caution than the average person. It's not fair, but it's the reality. At the same time, when you're the league, that's a very significant concern that's directly related to how you conduct your business. And then Eric Spoelstra's final comments, I thought, were, far less worrisome than that, but essentially told a story about how last season a Miami Heat fan had to be, Miami Heat fan, somebody in the crowd, had to be removed because they were yelling at the Miami Heat bench and specifically at Victor Oladipo, because he did not take a shot that would have probably extended, again, the cover or the points total, whatever it was. And of course, the game was already decided. Like I just mentioned, there's sportsmanship to this. There's a lot of people that care about these things. Like, this isn't just all for the moolah. And that's something I'll get to in a second. But that's another very concerning issue. And it's something that, to be honest with, I went to go see Mavs Wolves game some years ago. I think it was Luka's rookie season. And Derrick Rose has a great game. It's very early season. Derrick Rose has a great game. And the whole time I'm sitting a couple of seats away from, a Mavs fan, whoever this guy is wearing Mavs crap, absolutely just yelling and screaming at Derrick Rose to tear his knee. And now, I'm not made of a lot of money, but if you remember, that team was trash. The Mavericks had been trash. So it was very easy for me to find $50 seat by myself, about 6 rows behind the goal on the Mavs side, I believe. And still just yelling, Derrick Rose tear your knee, Derrick Rose tear your knee. So the in-stadium conduct has always been questionable at any sport. I mean, you have Buffalo, they're throwing dildos on the field. Don't even get into Europe with the racism and just the general anarchy. So that stuff always kind of is going to happen, but it is notable again the specific nature of this issue, because we're talking about very specific situations here, and it does become more of an issue. That's pretty much it. I mean, from the quote stuff, there was also some Tim Donaghy quotes, which I got to shout out the New York Post for just staying the who they are with making sure to reach out to that man and publish that story, because I gave it a click. I shouldn't have, but I did. I gave it a click and I read it, and it was like kind of obvious stuff. So it wasn't like I was going to bring it up here. I just thought it was funny how shameless we get about covering these things. I mean, look, I'm doing like 10, 15 minutes on this in the middle of the show just because I thought it was that necessary. And because I know the SEO is probably going to be pretty nice on YouTube. Let's be honest. But either way, I have to come forward and be honest with you guys on a couple of things here. So in 2020, I was working in a nicer company and was able to make a little extra cash. And I bought 9 shares of DraftKings. And I did so because I had just spent the year and a half prior in Austin. Kind of around a lot of new people. So, you're making small talk, you're meeting a lot of people in ways that, you're like, who are these people? And it's like, this guy likes sports. And it's like, oh yeah, sports guy sports. And I always kind of noticed this stuff, especially when I was in college. But there was, there's always levels to fandom. There's people who really, really love it, that really grow up with it, probably played it a lot. Have a different sort of passion for watching it, right? Maybe like the strategy of it, whatever it is. Then there's always some people who have been more on the fantasy side of it, right? Like I like to be a part of community. I like to, be a part of something. And I don't know a lot about football, but I know that fantasy football is kind of a crapshoot because guys can get injured and we don't really know who's going to get the points all the time. So like, even though I don't really know football, I can kind of participate in football with these people, and I can learn and meet more people. And so I think a lot of times we default to that, right? And what I really noticed, especially when I was in Austin, was that there was a ton of grown men, recent college grads, obsessed with 2 things: Barstool Sports and gambling their asses off. Like everything. Like this was the main hobbies. And on one hand, good for all those girlfriends. They're probably lucky they're not fucking around. But like on the other side, sorry about your credit debt in about 3 or 4 years whenever this addiction fully rears its ugly head. Because a lot of this stuff is, it's really kind of gross in a lot of ways. And I think that part of the culture, not just to separate those people, it's not just be mean to them, because it is very broad. It's happening everywhere. Barstool is itself, in my opinion, very responsible for this. So look, I hedged my bet and I bet on the thing I hated the most, because that's kind of how capitalism works. I was like, this sucks. I hate what this is doing to the sports, but holy shit, it's making a lot of money for sports. I should get in now. And it didn't really work that well for a while. And now a couple years later, this shit is looking pretty nice. And it's because guys like LeBron James are signed to DraftKings. You know what I mean? DraftKings is on League Pass. So I understand the hypocrisy here 100%. I only did it. I don't have other shares of stuff. I don't know how to play the market a second of my life. I've never even considered it. Do you see how much basketball crap I have? I don't have the bandwidth for more. So, there was just a moment in life where it kind of smacked me in the face, and it was like, this is about to be the biggest thing ever, good or bad. So just gamble on it, right? And I gambled on it. Like $400 worth of gamble, so really not that bad when you think about the long-term investment thing, but that's not what these gamblers do. This $400 that I put into this stock that is eventually going to pay out probably way more these guys gamble that in a week on crazy parlays, like insane parlays, like absolute Charlie at the whiteboard, and it's always sunny levels of batshit. Um, you know, so part of me, wants to play the curmudgeon and be like, my grandfather instilled a love of sports into me. It was not only the strategy of thinking a game, but then taking that and channeling it in your body, understanding, watching what these great people are doing and capable of, because they've put so much time and effort in. Thinking at the beginning that you can't do any of it, can't come close to any of that, trying it, and getting as close as you can for your own personal, journey, right? I mean, we're not all going to be NBA players, right? So like to at least harness a little bit of that, to watch them live out what you only could want to do, right? Like what maybe your knees don't allow you to do, maybe your situation didn't allow you to do, whatever it was. You get to see that, and that's the love and the admiration you have of both the game and the people that play it. And I think that was what a lot of sports was built on, right? We had too much free time in early America. All the pro leagues basically just exploded after World War II. Because a lot of things exploded after World War II, and that is not a dark joke. Yeah, it wouldn't actually work because it wasn't after that everything exploded. But anyway, not the point. It's something that for me, it's always been hard. And like I was really stubborn about fantasy. I don't even like playing fantasy sports. I'm like, I don't. What the fuck does this matter? Like this is me putting more bandwidth into something that literally doesn't matter because I want to be a part of a community though, right? And like that's the biggest issue. And so I think for people like me, maybe less community driven folks, it's easy to sit here and soapbox. But on the other side, there's a lot of people who need that, want that, that human interaction that they can't get in other places. And in fantasy and gambling is such an easy bridge of the gap. So we're talking about a lot of things here that basically mean that gambling is here to stay, regardless of how you feel. In fact, my grandfather, who taught me all this love and admiration for sports, what do you think he was doing at the 19th hole every Sunday at the golf course, right? Like, come on. This has been around. My dad was filling out those little boxes when I was a kid, hanging out the bar with them. And yes, that's how we do it in Texas. I don't recommend it, but it's just life here. Is what it is. So that's just kind of the way I genuinely look at it. I guess encouraging responsible gambling is the appropriate way to move forward with this. I would always suggest that. One time I remember hearing Gene Simmons say, about gambling, like I grew up with nothing. Why would I gamble that away? You know what I mean? And legitimately looked clueless at someone when they were asking him, why doesn't he gamble? When he goes to Vegas all the time too, right? I'm similar. I'm a similar person. Sometimes the way you grow up with money, it changes who you are forever. And there's no amount that would ever fix that, right? But at the same time, like encouraging responsible gambling, but then also promoting gambling is just a double-edged sword. We saw an advertisement that went viral this week on Twitter where it was a bus advertisement for, I think, FanDuel. And it was basically a guy who was like, oh, your car's broken down? I know how you can fix that. That's crazy. Like that right there is exactly the problem. like perfectly the problem. Like if your advertisement sounds like it could be on a South Park episode, maybe throw it back in the fall. That's all I'm saying. Maybe just don't kick that idea out into the public. So even if we do encourage responsible gambling, this is going to be such slow and painful processing. Like just like similar issues like the opium crisis, things that we've had to deal with in America, they're not going to react to them at the appropriate levels until there's like 10 years of evidence, until we're down a path that people cannot come back from quickly. That's just how it works. So I guess the other part that I say, and I say to any of your friends, and obviously like, share, and subscribe is always the motto here, but especially this point, please, if you're going to gamble, have fun with it. Set a budget. You should already have a budget if you're a grown adult. I'm sorry, I hate to be the old man in the room, but you got to have a budget. It's the only way you're going to make shit work in life. have a budget out whatever's a funny sum amount, right? $50, $100 a week, whatever. I mean, I don't know your story. I'm not trying to tell you to limit it that high or low or whatever. Put a budget out and play to that. Have fun with it that way. Be responsible about it. Limit whatever it needs to do. I mean, these apps aren't going to make it easier. They're not going to do that. And if you get so good at this too, by the way, like it's not like these people are nice. Like when you get good at gambling, all they do is just find ways for you not to gamble anymore. Like they don't just go, "Oh shucks, what a great winner he is. I'm trying to let him keep robbing us." That's not like, if there was that many successful gamblers, the whole industry wouldn't work, right? Like the house always wins. You have to understand those things. Like that's not just movie quotes from back in the day. Like the house literally always wins. So here's the thing. Again, just please be responsible. No one can hold you accountable but yourself, unfortunately. You have people that love you. You have plenty of other good things in the world that you can bond with other people on. Watch some movies. Find some other stuff that doesn't cost moolah. Go back to fantasy sports without the money side of the fantasy part. Because now at this point, I think they're both tied into each other. I don't know. I'm terrible at both, right? So probably the least best person to help you there. But be careful, because I'm not just telling you because I think, when I tell you some of these things about these teams, I'm pretty strong. I'm pretty sure about them, right? Knowing what I know about basketball, knowing what I know about these teams as they're moving out through the season, I feel pretty good about those guesstimations. But they're guesstimations. Again, I started the show by telling you I had Auburn to win it all. And I feel good about that. And they lost the first game to Yale. So I know when I'm prognosticating and when I'm telling you just point blank reality. 5 to 10 years, most of us are going to know people who have been crippled by gambling addiction. That's facts. It's not actually facts yet, so don't actually quote this and put this anywhere. But if you don't feel that way, I just don't know what to tell you. Anyway, soapbox coming down. All right. We're going to do a couple highlights because there was 2 teams that I felt needed to be talked about, even though Tiers will really need its own episode because I've got to do basically an hour and a half just to get through all 30 teams. But this isn't the Bill Simmons podcast. This isn't ESPN. We do more than Celtics-Lakers coverage here, baby. We're going to talk about the Miami Heat. They actually do get enough content to talk time. So, not necessarily doing a small market team a favor here, but I needed to talk about these guys because there's been some very concerning issues here. Now, of course, Tyler Hero's still not back, so you can't really call this a full healthy squad yet. But they kind of have enough to where you would really be expecting them to win. It wasn't that long ago that on the main podcast we did some future bets, gambling, on Coach of the Year. And I was like, Eric Spoelstra probably could make a good run at it, especially because he has the never won one angle. Well, he's not going to come for the award anymore now. There, at this point, I think Joe Mazzulla will probably roll away with that one pretty handedly. But yeah, at this point, I don't think that there's any Miami surge. They had the ability. I saw the schedule. It was there. They still have the ability to kind of get there. But I just think at the end of the day, the Celtics are just, they're killing the regular season. I think Mazzulla almost has to be Coach of the Year. So regardless, 4-6 in their last 10. Again, we were hoping to see an uptick of that. I think 2 weeks ago is when I kind of checked in on Miami last. We were hoping to see better on that. And then moving forward, you've got a very winnable schedule here. You have the Cavs, the Warriors, the Blazers, the Wizards, the Knicks, the Sixers. Realistically, 6 games you should win. Cavs obviously a little hurt still. Maybe Joel's back by the Sixers game. That's a big-ass hard maybe. And then the Knicks, maybe they've got OG back and maybe even plus another guy. So not necessarily the back 2 that I'm is concerned about. The Warriors are also fighting for their damn lives, and we'll get to that story in a second, or part of that story in a second. So again, you have to remember that they're not all just wins here. You have to actually go out and do them. And the reason I also say that is because this last 10, we have You would lose. You have a loss to the Wizards, a very inexplicable loss. Then you need a game-winning shot from Bam Adebayo to do a sweep of the back-to-back series with the Pistons. You have 2 games against the Pistons, and you barely squeak by the last one. Again, maybe a little nitpicky, but that's a little frustrating. Then you lose to the Sixers, who are just basically, in a worse spot than you are, and they're directly behind you in the seeding now. So you do want to stave them off, especially if you want to jump back into the 6th seed and get out of the play-in. You have a chance to steal one in New Orleans after Brandon Ingram's injury, but then you just absolutely lay a duck, and Zion doesn't even play very well, and you just don't even come close to winning in that one. And outside of a dominant game in Cleveland, Jimmy has not been shooting the ball very well. So are these all the telltale signs of the previous issues with the Miami Heat? Yeah, kind of. But at the end of the day, is there a little bit more, concern this season? It kind of feels like it. But it's again, I feel like I'm setting myself up. I'm setting myself up to bail on Miami, and then they're gonna make me look stupid in the playoffs thing. But it just feels gross a little bit. Feels a little injured. Feels like maybe even they've kind of gotten tired of this version of them, where it's like, I don't think that they're disrespecting the regular season the same way, but it definitely feels like they're the least concerned about it, because now they're, again, walking back into the play-in when they had no reason to be in the play-in right now. They had no reason to even be in a conversation for the play-in right now. So we'll have to keep looking at Miami. Again, I just wanted to note a little frustration there, a little curiosity again, or maybe just to set us up for another one of those Miami pulled the rug out from under us, we're going to go from 8th seed to the finals again. I don't know. It just feels like doing that twice in a row has to be like the craziest odds of all time, right? Back to game one. All right. Final thing we're going to talk about, and a team that, I honestly have really probably neglected the most out of all the teams, and I'm happy to admit that. It was a decent team most of the season. It really hasn't been one of the worst rosters in basketball, but it felt like, ultimately there was going to be a little bit of a chance that they could have fun this season. And it was like, oh no, there's some significant problems still, maybe even some very significant problems with Jalen Green. All of a sudden, slowly but surely, the turn of the year came, and slowly but surely this team is playing some damn good basketball. And look at them now. They're at 500. I've pretty much been talking about the West is already, the top 10 teams are already locked in. They're half the game away from jumping the Warriors now, I think. You see 9-1 in the last 10. Some of these wins are very easy to nitpick. There's some gimme games there. But I think there's some big time changes with this roster that are more significant than just them winning some games against, some winnable games, them doing what they're needed to do, right? So number one thing, Fred VanVleet, since March 2nd, is shooting 48% on 8.4 3-point attempts a game. That's like start of the year kind of shit. Obviously, you don't expect that stretch to continue forever. I think he had 10 for 15 the last game they had. You don't expect that to last forever, but you have to note that. Your point guard, the guy setting up your whole offense, while the other stuff that I'm about to mention is working, getting you that kind of production is obviously that almost is throw your hands up. What are you going to do about it kind of stuff. Dylan Brooks. I want to note one very important statistic, and this is a Dylan Brooks statistic that always matters. Always matters. 3-point attempts. I didn't say 3-point makes. I said 3-point attempts. Below 5 a game in this 10-game run. We like that. I think there was even an 0 for 5 game. I'll take that. Just shoot the ball less. Everything else he does is fine. The antics I don't love. The fake tough guy stuff gets annoying. But the 15 3-point shots a game, that's the stuff that makes me want to not have him on my roster at all. And that's crazy because it does negate a lot of talent and a lot of positive. But he can shoot you out of a damn game at any moment. And that's why I have to note that 5 game less. Look, it's the new NBA. He's out on the wing. They're going to leave him open. Shoot the ball. Don't not shoot the ball. Go 0 for 5. I'm fine for that. But don't go 2 for 7 all the time. You know what I mean? Don't even 2 for 7 I can live with. Don't go towards that 10. If you're at 8 or 9 in the game, I don't want to see that double digit. Just keep that 8 or 9. Unless you're really hot that night, just keep that 8 or 9 at 8 or 9. But ideally, let's get it closer to 5. And then, of course, the biggest news for Houston is Jalen Green. Over the last 10 games, averaging 28 points, 6 rebounds. I believe there's 2 double-doubles and 2 more almost double-doubles rebounding. Of course, Jalen Green, even at his best, is probably not going to be a guy who leads the league in assists, right? And he's shooting 42% from deep. So, I'm not going to go into the off-season stuff or the off-the-court stuff that's going on that people are, that even Jalen himself has given credit for this turnaround. I'm happy for him. I do not judge whatever. In fact, I'm very happy to hear the story of an NBA player accepting fatherhood and their responsibility as a pro athlete. That is never going to stop getting old to me. So very happy for that angle of it. But it's also just fun to see him play some of his best basketball. Make people not feel as crazy for being as high on him as they were. Now, I'm not going to say I was ever that high on Jalen Green. I think that it was obvious that he was clearly one of the best talents that I've ever seen. Just from a pure 2K creative player thing, it was unquestionable that Jalen Green was talented coming out of the draft. But did he have a lot? And I mean a lot of telltale signs of fuckboy ball, right? And then he got into the NBA, and that was basically what he was known for 2.5 years. So it's nice. It's nice to see the efficiency. It's nice to see the maturity in the game. Again, I don't need you to be the assist leader. I need you to I need you to attack the rim. The free throws are still a little low for him. I'm not watching all these games, so my assumption is also probably that he's not getting the greatest calls. We're also in a period where free throws are down altogether. So there's a couple of things there that I think are important. Definitely have to note those things because it's very easy to complain about free throws, but of course we have to remember how much goes into free throws. The thing with Jalen is that he's just too damn athletic to not be driving at the cup all the time. So again, I want to see whatever we feel like the league average is. I want to see Jalen Green in or around that average every year. So it's really nice. I still think there's a world where they could package him with another, with their picks and add a player to accelerate what they're doing in Houston. But at this point, I think the smart money may be to not do that, at least for another year. And maybe there's a regression year next year, but we'll see. You're looking at what's forward for these guys. You got the Blazers in Houston, and they're going to go to Oklahoma City and Utah. Go 1-2 in that realm. That's perfect. Of course, no games are guaranteed, but if you go 1-2 in that world, that's pretty perfect, right? And that could even put you in the 9th or 10th place in doing so because Golden State and the Lakers are that close now. But then that's when we're going to probably start putting the fraud meter, the microscope, whatever you want to say. We're probably going to start looking at Houston much, much, much harder because you're going to have them hosting Dallas before they go out to Minneapolis. And then you're going to end up having them host Golden State and Miami before I think playing another game against Dallas in Dallas or at home. I don't remember. So a much more competitive crowd coming up. The Blazers are playing some of their best basketball. They just killed the crap out of the Jazz the last night and night before. And so, those are 2 wins most likely, but 2 games you still have to go out there for. Then you have a meter game with the Thunder where it's like, okay, OKC is still competing for both MVP for Shea, maybe Coach of the Year for Mark Daigneault, and very, very much so the number 1 seed. And they expect them to continue to have to fight for the number 1. I think the number 1 seed will probably come down to the final week of basketball. So Oklahoma City really doesn't have any opportunity to play any sort of gimmick ball or any sort of benching of guys. Like it's not likely to come against Houston, especially because you could be introducing this team as a play-in that could end up being your 1-8 matchup. You know what I mean? You don't want that kind of stuff. So you expect them to be very serious about it. Dallas is playing some good basketball right now. They have 2 games to get not only their competitors in Houston away, but to try their hardest to get into that 6th seed where Phoenix almost seems like they might steal last minute here. And then, of course, Minnesota. Minnesota's obviously still lacking Karl-Anthony Towns, but not lacking talent. And then Golden State, I mean, they're literally the team in front of you here. Like, if there's any team that Houston can realistically take over and stay over, it's them. I also think probably the Lakers too, and we may be getting to a situation with Sacramento by the end of the season, but mostly, Golden State is your key focus, right? So having that game will be a massive one. And then, of course, Miami, who knows what the Zombie Heat are going to be, but at least that game would be at Houston. So either way, even if this is all for naught, there's a couple of notable, interesting things coming out of this Houston run. One, this is an incredibly interesting team moving forward. And 2, the Western Conference is quite potent this year because I didn't think it was going to happen, but we might get to a point where the 11th seed is a above 500 team, regardless of if it's Houston, Golden State, Los Angeles, whoever. So I definitely find those things to be very interesting, especially as we move into a new world where perhaps expansion could be coming. Who's moving to what conference? With Minnesota and New Orleans essentially being the 2 teams that it's like, do both go to the East in that situation? Who knows? Does the West then by proxy take 2 expansion teams at the same time? Probably. Either way, we'll get all of that when we get there. We're still probably 2 years away from all that, if I'm being honest with you folks. But for now, thank you for enjoying some hoopla with me. Get back to watching some games. Hopefully your bracket's looking better than mine. And if it isn't, let's go ahead and shift gears to the NBA season. And I hope that shift gears doesn't mean that I'm also about to be doing a live NASCAR race watch with you guys, which, I'm always happy to do for the people, but Jesus Christ, 3 hours of sitting through a NASCAR race is the worst form of punishment for a bracket challenge that we've ever created. Patrick, you're a sicko.